Hello. Hello.
Hello everyone, and I hope I'm audible. If there's any problem with my mic, just let me know in the comment box. And it's 3-1 now, so I'll just you know first of all, thank you everyone for joining for this first episode of the On Trial series presented to you by Criminal Law Review. And we'll start the trial at 3-5. Till then, we'll have a few clips to show you from the movie, and, just to refresh your mind, and uh, that way you know about the important facts that will be referring to the film, and whenever there is any argument with respect to that, you'll be able to connect, uh, right? So. Hi, I'm getting a request that the voice is not clear and I have to be a bit loud. Just give me a second. I'll try to change a few settings here. Just give me a second. Hi, could someone just confirm if my voice is loud and clear and if you can hear me clearly? Just drop it, comment in the chat box. Perfect. Uh, cool. Thank you. We have a few clips to show you. Uh, give me a second. I'll just. We're starting with the first. The first clip is about the speech, which the first clip is about the speech Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe gave on the first day of the incoming batch, and here you go. Hi, I got a few messages that the audio was not clear or even no, some of you could not hear it. So we'll just we'll start with this first the charge sheet which we have for the episode, and Haritima from the criminal review team will describe the charges that we have pressed against Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, and then we'll start with the trial. Just to give you like idea about the format that we are trying to follow is that we first introduce the charges. That is the first stage, that is naming of charges, and then we go towards the second stage, that is uh, the second stage where we try to find out whether the person, the accused here, that is Viru Sahastrabuddhe, is actually guilty of of any of the charges framed against him or not. The third part is about sentencing, whether what sentence should be given to him. So basically, with the term of his imprisonment, right? Uh, uh, in between these things, the first part, second part, third part will have 5 minutes for public comments between after every charge. So, for example, the first charge is 306 IPC. Uh, After the first charge, we'll have a public comment where you could share whatever comments that you have, either in the chat box, or you could unmute yourself and share your thoughts, or like if there's any counterpoint that you'd like to share with the team, and then we'll try to answer the same, and then we move forward. After we're done with all the charges, after we're done with the sentencing of the third part of the series, we again open the floor for 10 to 15 minutes of public comment. That the floor will be open for everyone. So, Aditya, I'll see what's the problem here. I'll make the changes. I invite Haritima from the team to introduce the charges and let the trial begin.
Hi, am I audible? If someone could just drop a comment or okay. So to begin with, the charge sheet was filed in Paharganj police station in central Delhi and was addressed to the Central District Court of Delhi. It was based on a complaint made by unmute their mic. It was based on a complaint made by Ranchodas Chanchar. I think Gulshan Sardana, their voice, their mic is not muted. Could everyone just mute their mic? Just check once. Okay, am I audible now? Someone could just drop it. I'll start again. To begin with, the charge sheet was filed in Paharganj police station in central Delhi and was addressed to the Central District Court of Delhi. It was based on a complaint made by Ranchodas Chanchar, who reported that his friend Raju Rastogi has attempted suicide on 20th January 2020. It was alleged in the complaint that Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, who is the director of Imperial College of Engineering, where both Mr. Chanchar and Mr. Rastogi studied, had abetted the suicide attempt of Raju Rastogi. The charge sheet was filed on 19th March 2020 and charged Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe with IPC Section 107, read with Section 309, abetment of suicide, Section 503, criminal intimidation, and Section 504, read with Section 309, provocation to attempt suicide. The accused was arrested on 25th January 2020 and was bailed out by his daughter after a couple of days. The evidence gathered during the course of the investigation was Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe's laptop, the letter on it, a medical certificate by Dr. Tejpal Yadav attesting to Raju Rastogi's injuries and recovery, the CCTV camera recordings from the ICE, and the witness statements of Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, Ranchodas Chanchar, Farhan Qureshi, and Gaurav Srivastav. It was alleged that Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe had blackmailed and mentally harassed Raju Rastogi, provoking him to attempt suicide. The accused had illegally demanded Mr. Rastogi's witness statement in a disciplinary issue by threatening rustication. Through CCTV camera recordings and witness statements, it was also found that the accused had previously humiliated Mr. Rastogi based on his family background and academic performance. He also made a bet with Mr. Rastogi he also made a bet about Mr. Rastogi not landing a job. According to the accused, he only took such harsh actions because he was dealing with a disciplinary Mr. Rastogi and his friends were involved in, and exercised his rights as a director to take actions against the alleged misconduct. Regarding the stringency in his conduct, has someone unmuted their mic? Okay. Regarding the stringency in his conduct before the incident, the accused said that he was only trying to motivate the students to work harder. Since the filing of the charge sheet, Dr. Raju Rastogi has recovered, and his witness statement regarding the incident has also been recorded. That's it.
Hello, am I audible? Can everyone hear me? Okay. So, in addition to these charges, Viru Sahastrabuddhe has also been charged with Section 309, read with 107 IPC. So, while Section 309 criminalizes suicide, Section 107 criminalizes abetment of offences. So, read with these two sections, we are trying to charge Viru Sahastrabuddhe for abetment of attempt to suicide. Now, with the introduction of the Mental Health Care Act, the legal position of Section 309 has become a bit precarious. It has come under scrutiny as it has been greatly reduced by Section 115, Clause 1 of the Health Care Act. However, attempt to suicide has not been completely decriminalized. If it is proved that the person who attempted suicide was not under severe stress, then he or she can still be booked under Section 309. Now, just a second. Yeah. Abetment of attempt to suicide is still punishable under Section 309, read with 107, as observed in the case of Gyan Kaur versus State of Punjab. Now, whether Raju Rastogi was under severe stress or whether the decision to jump off the building was taken in the heat of the moment is the main factor determining the culpability of Viru Sahastrabuddhe. Now, without waiting any further, let us begin the trial of Dr. Sahastrabuddhe.
Thank you, Samriti. For the first charge against Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe is that he abetted the suicide attempt of Mr. Raju Rastogi, and the charges are 306 and 309, read with 107 of the IPC. From the prosecution side, Ishani Shekhar will be arguing, and I hand it over to Ishani. Ishani, you can take it.
Could someone just confirm if I'm audible? Thank you. A very good afternoon to all the attendees. A very good afternoon to all the attendees. I'm Ashani, and I'll be dealing with the charge under Section 309 of the IPC, read with Section 107 of the IPC. As already pointed out by Samriddhi, the Supreme Court in Jian Kaur versus State of Punjab restricted the scope of Section 306 and held that abetment of attempt to commit suicide is outside the purview of Section 306 and it's punishable only under Section 309, read with 107. Abetment, as has been defined under Section 107, is constituted by instigating a person to commit a crime, or engaging in a conspiracy to commit it, or intentionally aiding a person to commit the crime. The act of Viru Sahastrabuddhe falls squarely under the first category, that is, instigation. In order to prove instigation, three essential elements of abetment need to be established. The very first one being the presence of mens rea or guilty intention on the part of the accused. In this regard, the Supreme Court in Kartar Singh versus State of Punjab made it fairly clear that the offence of abetment depends upon the intention of the accused and not upon the act which is actually done by the person whom he offends. Just like every other the offence of abetment also requires the presence of mens rea. The malicious intention of Viru Sahastrabuddhe is evident from his continued conduct towards Raju Rastogi. On several occasions, he had berated and humiliated Raju in a very bad way. On one occasion, he targeted Raju by calling him upon the stage and making a public statement regarding his inability to obtain a job. Such a statement could not have been made with a bona fide intention, as it would lead to Raju, who was already a very scared person, into believing that he was worthless and incapable.
Ishani,
Yes?
just a minute. I think your voice is not clear to some to some of the participants. Could you please check that?
Am I audible now?
Yeah, that's fine now.
Okay. Viru Sahastrabuddhe has a history of berating and humiliating students and refusing them a second chance. On an earlier occasion, Viru refused to give another student named Joy Lobo a second shot at making his submission, something which he was very passionate about. A few days later, Joy had committed suicide. One of the students even went to the extent of blaming this on Viru Sahastrabuddhe himself and termed it as murder. The malicious intention is further also established by the fact that Viru Sahastrabuddhe proceeded unilaterally against Raju Rastogi without giving him a chance of being heard and without following the due process of law, thereby violating many principles of natural justice. The second element is that there has to be a proximity and direct nexus between the behavior and conduct of the accused and the act of the offender. In the present case, the timing of the attempted suicide connects the conduct of the accused directly with the act of the offender. The last incident was a triggering point for Raju, which led him to the step of taking his own life. The time gap between the instigation caused by the accused and the commission of the offense also matters. Therefore, it can be said that if the offense is committed after a reasonable span of time following the instigation caused by the accused, then it can be inferred that the offense was the result of the instigation caused by the accused. The time gap in the present case between the instigation and the commission was almost negligible, as it was merely approximately less than 7.5 minutes. The third element is a rather important one. Instigation has to be inferred from the conduct of the accused.
the legal position regarding Kumar Chopra versus State of New Delhi. The Supreme Court reiterated the legal position laid down in its earlier judgment in the case of Ramesh Kumar versus State of Chhattisgarh, and held that whether accused by his acts or continued course of conduct creates such circumstances that the deceased was left with no other option except to commit suicide, an instigation may be inferred. In this light, and in support of this, various facts have already been presented to you, such as humiliation and constant veneration on the part of Viru Sahastrabuddhe. I'd like to place greater emphasis on the last incident and the incident preceding the attempt to commit suicide. The last incident was the triggering point wherein Viru Sahastrabuddhe put Raju Rastogi in a quandary by asking him to write either his own name on the rustication letter or writing his friend's name. Unable to make this rather tough decision, Raju instead chose to take his own life. Thus, overall, it can be concluded that all the circumstances created by Viru Sahastrabuddhe together pointed Raju in a direction where he thought that suicide was the only option available to him. With this, I rest my argument.
Thank you, Shani, for presenting your arguments against Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe. So, as you saw, the major argument being whether that meeting that the Raju Rastogi and Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe had just prior to the incident, whether that was a direct, that had a direct connection between the conversation they had uh, and the incident, the suicide attempt by the Raju Rastogi. And we'll try to see what the defense has for in favor of Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, whether how the defense tried to figure out whether those two incidents were connected or not, whether what was the relationship between these two individuals, Raju Rastogi and Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe. I hand it over to Honor. If you guys have any questions or any queries with respect to the facts or legal arguments presented so far, you can drop your questions in the chat box. We'll be happy to answer that. Or if you have any particular questions from either of the speakers or from the defense or the prosecution side, you can, please feel free to ask. But in the meanwhile, I hand it over to Honor from the criminal review team to defend Dr. Virus. Honor.
Hi, I just wanted to confirm whether I'm audible. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Hunar and I'll be speaking for the defense side. First of all, we'd like to start by stating some relevant facts to the case. First of all, there was a very consistent disregard for rules by which we believe disciplinary action from the administration. I'm going few instances to substantiate that point. Raju Rastogi with two of his friends and classmates. I'm sorry, am I still some network issue? Am I audible? Okay, thank you. I'm going to give you a few instances of indiscipline by these students. Raju Rastogi, Farah Qureshi and Rancho had broken into the house of the director, in this case, who is the accused. They vandalized the private property and consequently urinated on the nameplate before running away. The director saw Raju's face before they disappeared. No official charges were pressed against the students, even after this, which would have been well within the rights of the accused. The next day, the director found these three boys in class. Raju visibly drunk as he disrespected the director in front of the entire class. In addition, we would also like to it was not the first case of indiscipline. Raju Rastogi, along with his aforementioned friends, had crashed the director's wedding at a previous instance and also forcibly submitted the answer sheets late even when the teacher had clearly told them not to. All these examples show that they broke rules all the time and were very undisciplined. Consequently, Raju was called upon in the doctor's office to type out his own rustication, which was a very reasonable and suitable action to take considering the behavior of the student. The director only asked Raju to act as a witness so that he could corroborate what had actually happened the previous night. He was not asked to falsify any facts or lie. Hence, the question of morality does not even come into question because Rancho was present the previous night as well. He was only Raju was only being asked to act as a witness to true events, which has been corroborated by the CCTV footage of that night. Moreover, we would also like to add that even if the rustication was unjustified, Raju could have always left the office and made an official complaint against this. That means legal course was always available to Raju. Had he decided to sign the letter for himself or act as a witness against Rancho? In both these cases, for options available after this. Now I'd like to talk about how this does not fall under section 107 of the IPC, which defines abetment. According to the section 107 of the IPC, there must be three things. One, either there should be any instigation by the person. Second, there should be engagement in some conspiracy. And third, that there should be an intentional or illegal omission. In this case, I'm sorry, somebody said no voice. Am I audible? Can you hear me? Could you just confirm if I am audible? Okay, okay, I am audible. So I would only like subclause talks about instigation, since the second and third subclause are not applicable in this case. Now, what comes under instigation? This was observed by the Supreme Court in Uday Singh and others versus State of Haryana. I would just like to quote what the court had said. Instigation means to goad, urge forward, provoke, incite, or encourage to do an act. A person is said to instigate another person when he actively suggests or stimulates him to act by any means or language, direct or indirect, whether it takes the form of express solicitation or of hints. Instigation may be in express words or by implied conduct. The word urge forward means to advise or try hard to persuade somebody to do something, to make a person to move more quickly in a particular direction, especially by pushing or forcing such person. In order to prove it must be shown that the accused kept on urging or annoying by words, taunts until the deceased reacted. We'd like to add that for it to be abetment to suicide, there must be active persuasion on the part of the accused. In this case, the persuasion is to push them to move, to improve, get more competitive in life, and nothing more than that. The driving force behind Raju's suicide was not any instigation or encouragement from the accused to commit the act, but rather the consequences of his own actions, which have been previously elaborated, as well as his own loyalty towards his friends. There were other factors that led him to do what he did. His financial condition, paralyzed father, unmarried sister, and sick mother made the situation such that he felt pressured to attempt suicide. Had these factors not been there, it cannot be conclusively said that the incident at the direct would have led to the same reaction that it did. The incident would have at maximum triggered unresolved that he was already facing in his personal life, and therefore in no way can be termed as abetting suicide or the reason for causation. Secondly, we'd like to point out that of an offense requires mens rea, that is criminal intent, which was observed by the Supreme Court in SS China versus Vijay Kumar Mahajan and others, as well as Neeraj Gupta versus State. There are no facts that suggest that the intent accused to encourage Raju to commit suicide. At a prior instance, the accused had also warned both Raju and Farah that they should focus on studies so that they can do better in life. Hence, the intention is the mens rea behind the acts of the accused to motivate them to mend their ways and perform better in life, not commit suicide, which is a very far-fetched allegation. After the unfortunate incident had happened, Mr. Viru immediately revoked the rustication so as to not aggravate the mental distress of the student, again proving that there was no mens rea. It is pertinent to note that all universities put a lot of pressure on students to perform, and it would be wrong to place that entire blame on a specific individual for what the education system as a whole is responsible for. Thus, it would be unfair to construe that everything that what Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe did, keeping in mind that Raju would commit suicide because of his actions. Further, the director was also going to let off Raju on for being a witness, ignoring his indecent actions. Hence, his intention was not to force him to commit suicide. In Uday Singh state of Haryana, the Supreme Court observed that if the acts and deeds are only of such a nature where the accused intended nothing more than harassment or a snap show of anger, a particular case may fall short of abetment of the offence of abetment to suicide. Thus, there was no mens rea in this case. Thirdly and lastly, we report that Raju was a hypersensitive student and did not have the reasonability of an ordinary man. In state of West Bengal versus Orilal Jaiswal, it was observed that if it appears to the court the victim committing suicide was hypersensitive to ordinary petulance, discord, and differences in domestic life, which are quite common to the society in which the victim belongs to, and such petulance, discord, and differences were not expected to induce a similarly circumstanced individual to react to in a given society to commit suicide, the court cannot find the accused guilty. To put in simple terms, if the person is hypersensitive and reacts differently than an ordinary man, the accused cannot be held guilty. Raju was a meek student. He was extremely superstitious and wasn't very confident in his abilities. He was seen praying before every exam, shown wearing multiple rings, and was easily offended by the things that his own friends said to him. Further, both his friends Farah and Rancho were subjected to similar treatment, but they merely laughed off most of the instances and didn't really seem that affected by what Viru Sahastrabuddhe did or said. The accused, Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, director of this institute for 32 years and had been students in a similar fashion. And there has been no prior official complaint against his teaching or the way he treated students. Every fresh batch of students for these past 30 years been subjected to the same competitive culture. Thus, we'd like to say that Raju Rastogi was a sensitive student who could not bear the burden that his family had put upon him. Would just like to elaborate. The Supreme Court has observed sensitivity. I would like to put forth the case of the state versus Bradpal Singh. I apologize, that district court case, not a Supreme Court case. In this case, the court dealt with hypersensitivity in terms of these offences. The deceased had been wrongly marked 0 in a paper, and the head had failed to acknowledge his mistake and did not inform the university and director for making corrections in the marks. It was made clear to the deceased that this will become a huge issue, so he should just give the paper again, and that he will not be able to get proper placement in the in services if this were to become an issue. Many legal remedies were available for the deceased for rectification of mistake, awarding him 0. Even though there was mental distress on the student, it did not threshold that was set for abetment to suicide. Thus, although the student was considered a bright one, who, however, he was still considered hypersensitive and not one with ordinary prudence. Thus, abetment to suicide, the accused was not held guilty. Another important observation in this case was that there should be proximity of the omission of duty of accused person on one hand, and its effect for commission of suicide by the other hand, which basically that if the accused could not have reasonably foreseen that his actions might lead to the student taking such a drastic measure, they cannot be held guilty, which is that needs to be considered, which was relevant in this case as well. So in conclusion, we argue that first of all, there was no instigation to commit the act on the accused. Second of all, there was no as well. Third of all, Raju was a hypersensitive student and that his actions could not be reasonably foreseen. Therefore, we state that this particular incident does not meet the threshold set for the abetment to suicide. Thank you.
Thank you, Nur. Aditya has a question that the scope of 309 read with after the recent development and the relevant case laws. So Aditya, after the, in 2017, the healthcare medical, mental health care act came, and if you read 115 of that act to with 309 of IPC, uh, it it means that the court shall assume that while the accused was trying to attempt suicide, that accused was under mental stress, and that's why there was no other reason for committing him or for committing that act. Basically, they are trying to decriminalize the act. However, that is the offense is not fully decriminalized. So if under any circumstances it could be proved otherwise that that the accused was not under mental stress, then the uh, then that person would be liable under 309 and would be punishable under the IPC. And after 2017, there hasn't been any case where the prosecution has been able to prove that has the where the court has noted down that the accused was actually not under mental stress, and then went on to punish the accused. And it's been just 2 years, so there hasn't been much cases on this side where we could see any uh, incident falling under 309 after this, the new amendment. However, there has been few cases where the Supreme Court has tried to figure out whether this attempt to suicide is an offense or not, and the Supreme Court has been a bit liberal on this side. Even the High Courts have been a bit liberal on this side, where they said that again going back to 115 of the Mental Health Care Act, that it will be presumed that the accused was under mental stress, and he could not have thought of his the kind of the act that he was trying to commit. So basically, if that part is taken out, and if the defense is able to prove that actually there was no mental stress, and the accused was on the same conditions, not affected by any, there was nothing, no mental injury to cause to accused. And under that, if the accused has attempted suicide, then he or she would be liable under 309 of IPC. And that's will be, I mean, it will be interesting to see how the courts try to analyze the term mental stress, because the courts have not defined this term even while dealing with 115 for Mental Health Care Act. So if there's any other question from the audience side, we'll be happy to take up. And I'll just explain it once again how 309 309 once and read with 107 is coming into. If you read 309 of IPC read with 107, that is abatement under IPC, then the offense that is being created is that it's an abatement of attempted suicide. So, and that's how it is. The person is liable. And there's one interesting case where I think it was in 2001 when Supreme Court was taking up a case with respect to 306 of IPC, and the question in that case, the person was charged under 306 of IPC, that is abetting to suicide. However, the person who was abetted to commit suicide did not actually, was not successful in committing the suicide and survived the attempt. Now, the question at that time was whether the person who was abetted that attempt could be punished under 306 of IPC. At that time, the court, ruled that that particular person cannot be charged under 306 of IPC, because 306 of IPC requires that the attempt must be successful. So if a person who has been abetted to commit suicide has taken that attempt but has been unsuccessful in that attempt and has survived the suicide attempt, then the person who has abetted will not be punished under 306 of IPC. However, at that time, the court did not look into one thing, which was, which the Supreme Court had actually prior to that case had already ruled that even though if that that accused that the person was abetted cannot be punished under 306 if the abetment is not, if the attempt is not successful, even then that person could be charged under 309 read with 107. So 107 of IPC is a general provision of IPC which may be read with any IPC law, any IPC offense. And if you read the 107 of IPC with 307, so sorry, 309 is your attempt to suicide, which is still an offense and not decriminalized. So 309 is an offense, which is attempt to suicide. 107 is abetment. So if you read these two offenses together, the offense that comes out is that there's an abetment to attempt. No, there's an abetment to attempt of suicide, which is the case here, and why that why Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe is under trial. So as we saw from both the sides, the major argument being whether there's a direct connection between the conversation these two had just prior to the incident and the suicide attempt or not. So whether there was, you could say that Raju Rastogi had actually some other option than not to commit suicide, or whether he was forced to an extent that he had no option but to commit suicide. And if you consider these things, what factors would come into play, whether the family background or some factor would come into play or not. If you look at the other two charges, and if there's no other question from the audience side, I would like to move towards the next charges that we have, and I will invite the other two speakers that we have for the other charges. I'd like to again confirm with the attendees once again if there's any queries from their side. Adit, are you fine with the answer that I gave? Fine, thank you. And if there's no other question from the attendees, there seems to be some comment. No. Azaya, there's some confusion at your side that when we're trying to when we're looking at an offense of attempt to suicide. In that case, the victim and the accused is the same person, but when we are looking at offense of abetment to attempt of suicide, then there's another person involved who is abetting the offense. So, say for example, in this case, if you look at in this case, Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe abetted. That's what we are trying to allege, that he abetted the attempt of suicide. So he tried to create an environment where Raju Rastogi had no other option but to commit suicide. So that is the allegation that we have against Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe. And that's, if you look from that angle, the person who is abetting is Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, and the person who is making an attempt to suicide is is Raju Rastogi. So in such cases, these two are different. So accused is Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, while victim is Raju Rastogi. Ajay, did you get it? Fine, thank you. And if you have any question, you can please feel free to drop your question in between. Even while the speaker is speaking, we're happy to take those questions up. And I won't take much of your time. We'll try to move to the next charge that we have. The next charges, there are two charges actually. First is 503 of IPC, where you're trying to provoke someone to commit some offense, right? And 503, the other charge is 504, which is criminal intimidation, read with 309. So criminal intimidation against is, 503 was you're trying to insult someone, while 504 is you're trying to provoke someone to commit some offense, right? So 504 again read with 309, that is your attempt to suicide. And for these two charges, we have Pratyusha and Haritima to argue. Haritima would go first from the prosecution side. Haritima, over to you.
Hello, am I audible? Good afternoon. I'm Haritima and I'll be dealing with the charges of Section 503 and Section 504 read with Section 309. Starting off with Section 503, which deals with criminal intimidation. The first requisite is threatening the reputation of a person or anyone in whom that person is interested in. Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe is the director of Imperial College of Engineering, a teacher and a mentor to the students of his university. It is beyond dispute that he can make a ruling on any of his students' esteem, making it plausible that he could employ this capacity to also threaten a student's reputation. Even though extensive power such as this ought to be followed by shouldering some responsibility, Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe has discounted himself of all accountability in case of Raju Rastogi. Looking at the letter he made Raju Rastogi write, which undeniably attests to the fact that a morally corrupt ultimatum was put forth to Mr. Rastogi, where he had to choose between himself and his best friend Ranchordas Chanchar to be rusticated from the university. Mr. Rastogi was made timid and afraid due to this letter. To take the defense of Raju's guilt, enabling Dr. Sahastrabuddhe's conduct and allowing the onslaught on his reputation is a folly, since the letter in question goes against the natural principles of natural justice, such as nemo judex causa sua and audi alteram partem. The events of the night before, when Mr. Rastogi and his friends had allegedly vandalized Dr. Sahastrabuddhe's private residence, are not subject to the decision of Dr. Sahastrabuddhe, who was a party to the issue. Even while dealing with students in conflict with law, due process cannot be set aside and casus belli cannot be declared. By saying, मुझे पता है रैंचो कल तुम्हारे साथ था, मेरे विटनेस बन जाओ और मैं तुम्हें छोड़ दूंगा. To deal with a personal issue in a professional capacity, he not only gave the verdict himself, but also deprived Mr. Rastogi of his right to due process. Moreover, it is unreasonable for the defense to expect Raju Rastogi to make a rational decision of availing other legal remedies with his career on stake and job placements approaching in the matter of 7.5 minutes. The reason being that at the same time, they countenanced Dr. Sahastrabuddhe not availing legal remedies regarding the vandalization of his private property over the course of an entire night with absolutely nothing at stake. In fact, his case was strong. He could become a witness himself after having caught a glimpse of Mr. Rastogi's face. However, he chose to rule on the matter himself and exact revenge in his professional capacity while dealing with a disciplinary issue that was unconnected to the vandalization. That is, he was dealing with the events of the morning of the incident when Mr. Rastogi showed up intoxicated and disrupted the peace of the class. Disregarding right to due process cannot be dismissed by contending that other legal remedies are always available. According to Supreme Court of India in Bihar School Examination Board versus Subhash Chandra Sinha, impugned orders are liable to be quashed and declared null and void for non-compliance with principles of natural justice. The letter in question is subject to the same conclusion. The second requisite of Section 503 requires the accused to have an intent to cause alarm to that person or cause them to do any act they're not legally bound to do. In V.W. Pradhan versus D.V. Salvi, it was held that the intention is the soul of criminal intimidation and that it needs to be gathered by surrounding circumstances. It is contended that the ultimatum itself, along with the personal vendetta the accused was known to have against Mr. Chanchar, was forced on Mr. Raju Rastogi and proved malicious intent. As held in A.K. Behar versus Nabina and others, the degree of such alarm may vary in different cases, but the essential matter is that it is of a nature and extent to unsettle the mind of a person on whom it operates and take away from his acts the element of free voluntary action which alone constitutes consent. After eliminating Mr. Rastogi's right to due process, mental him and leaving him in tears, it is submitted that the intention of the accused was to cause alarm to Mr. Rastogi and cause him to attempt suicide. That is pretty evident. This proves the guilt of the accused in criminally intimidating Raju Rastogi. Under the guise of mending their students' ways for the better, our myopic view of the teaching profession often blinds us to the abuse of authority that can take place if unchecked, just like it did in this case. Moving on to Section 504, read with Section 309. One of the requisites of Section 504 entails the accused to have intentionally abused the person who commits any offense. In this case, malicious intent on Dr. Sahastrabuddhe's part is apparent with his blatant lack of heed to Mr. Rastogi's right to due process. An appropriate committee to deal with disciplinary issues was absent, and the accused exercised his power as a despotic pedagogue and not as an honest disciplinarian, blackmailing Mr. Rastogi to become a witness against his friend after declaring the verdict himself. This malice has been seen in previous incidents at the college when he disrespected the parents of Joy Lobo, a student who then committed suicide. According to Farhan Qureshi's statement, he had humiliated Mr. Rastogi on stage at a batch meeting and called him to office to his family background. Mr. Chanchar claims that the accused had also made a bet with him about shaving off his mustache if Mr. Qureshi and Mr. Rastogi secured a job. Mr. Qureshi and Mr. Chanchar also stated that the accused had repeatedly made speeches about death being the only option for students with poor academic performance and had paid no attention to the severe ragging culture that pervades the university. Making such speeches on the first day of his student's college life not only proves his unrestrained Schadenfreude, but also makes it plausible that Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe could do much worse to a student discreetly. Just because many other students made themselves immune to such abuse, we cannot hold their response as a benchmark of an average person. Mr. Rastogi was right to stress, be paranoid and anxious in a place where his abilities are mocked in public and his financial background is pointed out in a very presumptuous manner by the authorities. The sanctified role of a teacher is vitiated by the malicious intent of the accused. The accused intended to insult and humiliate Mr. Rastogi. Knowing his poor financial background, he blackmailed him, which in effect provoked him to attempt suicide. According to M.S. Ali versus T. Bora, Section 504 does not require any abusive language to be used. All that is necessary is that there should be an insult causing provocation. Although Section 504 requires the following provocation to lead to the commission of a crime, the application of Section 309 is deemed to be unsettled in light of Section 115 of Mental Health Care Act 2017. The latter presumes that the person attempting suicide has severe stress, disabling the applicability of Section 309 of IPC. It is contended that even though Mr. Rastogi was under stress at the time of attempting suicide, it was caused by Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe. Mr. Rastogi was not suffering, but it was inflicted on him due to being pilloried in public and private by the authorities. A person who, after almost losing his life, goes to a job interview fearlessly after a fast recovery cannot be said to be mentally weak. Granted, Mr. Rastogi had a very positive environment at the hospital which aided his recovery. But even before attempting suicide, he was inseparable from his two best friends, much to Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe's dismay. Despite the competitive environment, anxiety, and paranoia which many students go through, Mr. Rastogi was a very easygoing, happy student. It is contended that the cause of stress was Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe himself, which only takes us back to the abetment charge. There is a need to again emphasize the fact that Mr. Rastogi's stress should not be dismissed as hypersensitivity after dragging his family background into the issue. It should be recognized as a product of the constant humiliation that he was subjected to by the topmost authority at his institution. To dismiss his paranoia and anxiety as unconnected to the misconduct of the accused would be justifying the latter. It was ill intention on of the accused that created intense stress and fear, and that intention had been materialized through the threat of the ultimatum. This dismantles the applicability of Section 115 of Mental Health Care Act. In conclusion, it is submitted that Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe is guilty of criminally intimidating and provoking Raju to suicide. With this, I submit my arguments.
Thank you, Aritima. And if the audience has any questions from at this point, please feel free to you know share in the chat box, and I'll try to summarize whatever the arguments so far. So from the first two charges we saw, with respect to 306, the argument being whether there was a direct connection between between the just the conversation these two had and the incident. But when we as we move forward, we saw that the prosecution is trying to go even beyond that, and even from the very beginning, whether how the virus was treating the students from the very beginning. If you like the clips we started in the very beginning of this episode, where the virus is referring how if you don't while you are entering college, you have broken the dreams of many. And the reference which he's drawing is very weird. He even mentions about his son committing suicide because he could not get into the colleges. They're like, oh, that is not something that is not the first thing that you would like to hear when you have joined the college, right? So I know, and if you see the kind of comments that he used to make, to his students, and so that's the prosecution side, that that conversation to Raju and by Viru Sahastrabuddhe had was not the only thing which instigated the suicide. In fact, it was how uh, Viru Sahastrabuddhe was treating Raju, and that was a peak moment when Raju realized that he did not have any other option but to commit suicide. So and that would be the whole argument, whether that these incidents have reached the power which is set by 309 red with 107, and the other two charges, that is 503 and 504 red with 309. Whether that we can consider that he abetted this suicide attempt, or whether uh, he committed an offense of criminal intimidation with respect to trying to abet the suicide attempt of Raju Rastogi. So we'll see how the defense responds to these arguments, whether all these stuff were interconnected or not. I'll hand it over to Pratusha. Let's see what she has to say. In the meanwhile, if you have any comment, please feel to drop in the chat box. Pratusha, to you.
Yeah, am I audible? Hello? Okay. So section 503 primarily discusses criminal intimidation as a threat of injury to his person, threatens injury to his reputation, injury to his property, and injury to the person or reputation of anyone in whom the person is interested. So, as even the prosecution mentioned, the intention behind the said intimidation to cause alarm to the person is relevant. In the present case, Mr. Sahastrabuddhe aimed to allow for reformation and to hold Mr. Rastogi liable for his actions. The accounts that occurred earlier in the day, as in Mr. Rastogi waking up inebriated in the class with empty liquor bottles rolling out, and further, the way he disturbed the class was not acceptable. If universally the reaction to such disciplinary actions is such, then there would be no benchmark for discipline, or the same cannot be implemented in the usual course. The reaction which Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe received in response was unexpected and unintended, in accordance with what was mentioned by him. Further, I want to highlight that it was a measure, in fact, undertaken to ensure that such actions are not undertaken in the future. It was to mention that class disruption will not be entertained. If it was someone other than Mr. Raju Rastogi, the reaction would have been the same. Additionally, Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe did not offer indignity at all. All he mentioned in the circumstances that occurred prior to Mr. Rastogi taking the same measures were all in his professional capacity, not going on his character or his personal background in any aspect, but only his disciplinary background. With respect to section 504, read with abetment to suicide, it requires that it indicates that the accused should insult the complainant and should thereby give provocation to complainant or any person intending or knowing it to be likely that such provocation would cause him to break the public peace or to commit any other offense. Further, the insult should be with an intention to provoke the person or with the knowledge that the person is likely to commit that offense. In dealing with the present case, we are well aware that the intention behind Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe and the words that he said were not to push Mr. Raju Rastogi to commit suicide. In fact, it was to set a benchmark. I mean, again, the same thing that if it was any other person aside from Mr. Rastogi, the words used by Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe would have been the same, as in to ensure discipline. The family background does not come into play, as all students to him would have to be treated equally. Further, I would like to highlight the term insult, that means to either treat with offensive disrespect or to offer an indignity to the person. This was mentioned in the case of Ramesh Kumar versus Srimati Sushila Srivastava. In the present case, as I established before, the words used by Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe were in no manner offering indignity to the person, but rather were just in the form of a notification of rustigation. Additionally, in the case of Karyamanchi Virangaya versus Katamar, it was mentioned that in dealing with an offense under this section, the court has not to consider the reaction of the person insulted to the insult made to him. An intentional insult and the resulted provocation, which under ordinary circumstances would lead to the breach of public peace or an offense to be committed by the person insulted, should be considered. So for this, I would take section 115 of the Mental Health Care Act, which primarily mentioned that there is a presumption that the person is in a situation of severe stress. Now, to further establish that Raju Rastogi was in fact in a situation of severe stress, we would look at the background. Primarily before he made this measure of committing suicide, the main conflict in his mind was what his father would be, what situation would his father be, because according to him, his father was alive to see him graduate as an engineer. So the stress on Mr. Raju Rastogi was not of an ordinary person. He had to take care of his entire family, his ailing father, his sister had to get married, and on top of that, his educational stress, as in he was not performing exceptionally well in his academics. So this in a way establishes that the reaction, understanding the background of Mr. Rastogi, it is established that he was in fact a situation of severe stress. Further, past instances have proved that Mr. Rastogi was in fact superstitious and more sensitive than his peers to certain situations. In such circumstances, it cannot be considered to be an ordinary situation. Mr. Sahastrabuddhe cannot be held liable under the present allegations, and I conclude my argument.
Thank you, Pratyusha. And if there's any question from the audience side, if there's anything, you can either drop it, drop your message in the chat box, or you can even unmute yourself and speak. Okay, I don't see any questions coming as of now, so I have a few questions to the to both the sides, and let's see how it goes. So we saw that that major argument being that he was actually trying to disciplined Raju Rastogi, who, and there were arguments from the defense side that uh, even his friends Farhan and Rancho, along with Raju, tried, had at many occasions misbehaved uh, with Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe and even other students. For example, even uh, they they changed the speech which Chatur was going to give at on 5th of September, right? And which was actually an embarrassment for him because he could not have figured out that what the speech meant, which obviously was not a light incident which should be taken, and obviously that that tracks disciplinary proceedings. And then even they broke into the Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe's house, and so if you consider all these things, whether even then, like it was just that in previous day that they had broken into Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe's house, and the next day, you know, uh, Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe calls Raju Rastogi to his office and start uh, dictating his investigation letter to him, right? So my point is whether at that point, was his decision influenced because of the how he perceived these three students, and because he always used to refer to these three students as three idiots, right? So and he was very vocal about it. He is even he even called these Farhan and Raju to stage and humiliated them in front of his other their other batchmates. So the question being whether that the conversation that when he was having that conversation with Raju Rastogi, whether he was influenced by the the humiliation that he received from them, because like they broke into his house, they even used to call him virus, right? And so whether that decision was influenced or not, or whether that decision was completely official as the director of Imperial College. So any of the speakers from the defense side, if they would like to take this question, Hunar or Pratyusha, would you like to take it?
Hi, could you just paraphrase that into a answer it better?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, Hunar. And my question is whether when Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe was dictating the rustication letter to Raju Rastogi, whether that decision to rusticate Raju Rastogi was influenced by the previous day incident when he and his friends broke into his house, or was that a purely official decision? What was the basis of that? Hunar?
hi. Yeah. So we believe. Am I audible?
Yeah, Raju.
So we just wanted to say that we believe that although in some cases people might think that the rustication itself was a very harsh measure, if you look happened at college, all the indiscipline events that happen in college, and if you take the previous behavior of the student as well as what happened, it would definitely will be taken into account when you are giving a harsh punishment such as a rustication. If you still question it on the basis of it being unjustified, already mentioned by the prosecution itself, that there should have been a disciplinary committee that decides what happens to this. Even if that was not the case, we still believe that if there are some wrong that if there are some wrong if there's some wrong decisions taken by a particular authority, there are always other authorities that you can go to seek some sort of legal recourse. That being said, we believe that since you mentioned that they were often referred to as the three idiots, or that they were often berated, we would say that in most cases, if not all, that beration or that those arguments or whatever was said to the student was never unprovoked. The students did act out, and only because they were acting out constantly did the authorities or the director or the administration was required to call them out for their behavior, because they were, as previously mentioned, constantly breaking the rules and being very undisciplined as a whole. If Pratyusha has something to add, over to her.
On to that. So if we look at it in the past, in the past instances, the speech incident which was carried out, there had been no involvement of Mr. Raju Rastogi per se. So if there was in fact personal vendetta involved, Mr. Raju Rastogi would not have been called at all to the office with the rustigation notification on that day. So, in fact, we do believe that this was a complete disciplinary action, because if there was personal vendetta um, playing a role in it, Raju Rastogi would not have been called at all to the office. Instead, Rancho would have been called directly.
Ashwini, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Am I audible? Okay, you're audible. Hello? So, since the defense has already painted Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe's picture as a bastion of equality or something, why do you suppose he did not take similar actions with Chatur, a student named Chatur, who also disrupted the peace of an entire assembly and embarrassed the institute's name, in front of an outsider, that is a deemed authority, that is a chief guest? So why do you suppose his conduct and his decision was different when it comes to Raju Rastogi, who also disrupted the peace of of the class only? He was not in the according to the defense, he was not acting in the capacity, he was acting in the capacity as a professional, and he was unconcerned with the vandalization, which is obviously a different issue. It was because of the disrespectful behavior of Raju Rastogi in the class, which made Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe call him to office. So why do you think his conduct was different with two students who did the same?
That please. Am I audible? Am I audible? Okay, I am audible. So first of all, we'd like to point out that we are unsure whether the statements of what happened in the Chatur incident were recorded, and that what happened after that, was there any disciplinary action, was there any inquiry as to what happened, since we don't know, since there have been no official records of what had happened with that incident. Far-fetched assumption for you to assume that the authorities did nothing, since we are unaware whether or not the administration officially did something, whether they inquired into the issue or not. Having said that, we would still like to say that when you're talking about questions of morality and all of those things, do you not see the difference between somebody actually doing something and somebody being framed into doing something else? It feels a bit odd when you're defending someone who was put into that position by the very people that you uh, a very morally ambiguous statement for you to say that just because Chatur also did the same thing, why weren't there any actions? Again, we don't know if there was any inquiry into the matter or not, since there's no official records, if I'm not wrong, that were submitted for that incident in this case.
Hi, I, right, he was not rusticated, but to answer your question with respect to that, even though I agree that he was not rusticated, obviously that's why he was there, but it was known to everyone there that Chatur was not good at Hindi, and he actually never understood even a word of Hindi, and he could not have figured out like what he was speaking, right? And even when he was speaking, when he was saying that he seemed clueless of what he was trying to convey. So, and if you take those facts into consideration, then I don't think there's there's any question of him being rusticated for that, and that would not be valid crime. Yeah, right. Uh, that's a good point that he might have been forcibly or intoxicated, and he there could have been other explanations for the same. So there could have been other explanations for the same, uh, but the same what if you refer to if you uh, rely on the facts facts presented in the movie. uh, Last in the previous day only they got drunk. I think they were sitting on uh, some stairs. I don't recall, there was some temple or something maybe, and they got drunk. Even Rancho, Raju, and Farhan, these three were there and they were drinking, and then uh, yeah, I get it, but the whole point being that I don't think there's a clear not a clear, but it's enough enough facts on record to say that prima facie Raju was actually drunk and he was responsible for the same, uh, because in the film there was this incident where these three are drinking at some stairs, and after that they went to uh, Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe's house, and then while when the guards started chasing them, they came to the university classroom and they hid there. And next day, they were there only, and next day, when virus entered the class, when Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe entered the class, Rancho and Farhan managed to get on the seat while Raju was still lying there on the ground. And when he, Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe called his name, he, all of a sudden stood up and started acting weirdly. So if you, if you see from, if you see someone, if you look it from the from outside when you trying to figure out that uh, that Raju was not, uh, the Raju was actually voluntarily drunk. I get your point that if you place in play, at the place of, if you are at the place of Raju, virus, Viru Sahastrabuddhe, it is difficult to figure out whether Raju was actually voluntarily drunk at that time or not. But those factors would be slightly less, I believe, would be uh, uh, would not be a major factor. And the whole question being, even though irrespective of the whether the action taken by Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe was out of personal vendetta or was purely official, acting as a director of Imperial College, that these two factors would not form a major would not form a major argument unless until they affect whether uh, when Raju Rastogi was facing Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, whether at that time Raju had an option to, Raju had another option or not. So, like the defense was saying that even though they, uh, you know, Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe was had already rusticated Raju in terms, the way he was trying to dictate the letter, and even if you see that, even if you consider that fact, Raju could have gone to other authorities to complain against that, to make an appeal against that, right? So that's one other option. Whether that option is sufficient enough to say that Raju had some other option, other than to commit suicide, because obviously this is a grave step, and this cannot be undone. So that should be the that should be the power that we should set whether the power is being met or not. So if there's any question from the audience or they have anything to comment on that, whether Raju was actually forced to an extent that he did not have that, he did not have any other option. In the meanwhile, I'll just explain whether, how the point with respect to whether the action taken by the rustigation or decision was actually, a material fact or not. So say, for example, there could be two of scenario where in the first case where the action taken by Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe was not at all, or was not, true, and was not good, was not a good decision, and it lacked, basic understanding of facts of whether, Raju was actually drunk or not, or voluntarily drunk or not. Second was, he actually knew what he was doing, and there was enough evidence to prove at least prima facie that Raju was drunk, voluntarily drunk. So in the first case, now try to frame the conversation that these two are having there in that room, and it established that there's there's not enough record, and there's not enough facts on record to prove that Raju was voluntarily drunk, but still virus castigated him. Even if that is the case, whether that makes suicide and, the only option to Raju or not, that is the major argument there, right? So even if that decision of rustication was, was not good in law, or even from a disciplinary proceeding, that decision lacked, facts, common, understanding of facts, and the Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe was not sure as to whether Raju was voluntarily drunk or not. Even that is to be taken into account. Even if we consider those as true facts, whether that makes suicide an only option for Raju or not. If it does, if Raju is pushed to to an extent that he does not have an option but to commit suicide, then we can think whether, then we can, argue on 309 read with 107. If not, then I doubt that there's a case with respect to 309 read with 107 of IPC. If there's any question from any of the speakers or from the attendees, please feel free to drop a drop a comment in the chat box. We're just 18 left here, so please feel free to speak.
Prosecution, if no one else has anything else before that.
Yeah, please.
We just wanted to ask, they did not engage with the point where.
I'm sorry. There is some question in the chat box. I'll just try to take this up, and then we can take your question later. Is that fine? Ajay, if you don't mind, if you don't mind, unmuting yourself and and read out your question, that would be great, because it seems to be a bit lengthy. And if you could, do you mind unmuting yourself?
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
So my question was, why virus was always chasing and targeting these three people or three students in the entire college?
Right.
I think virus figuring out that Raju was the weak lead among the group, and he did all the background check of Raju.
Okay.
And then threatening him to rusticate him, and Raju being aware about the virus position and what he is capable of, left Raju with no option than to commit suicide. The virus knew that either Raju will choose to reveal the names of his friend or commit suicide, and he still threat Raju to rusticate from the college. I think that suffices the element of intention.
Okay. Thank you, Ajay. I'll try to. If does defense want to take this question, Honor or Pratyusha, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, I don't mind answering that question.
Yeah. Please.
I am audible. I think that I want to talk about. Just let me open the question just a second. Yeah, so that why was targeting these three students? We like to. It might sound like targeting, but you have to understand that these were one of the major students that were creating a ruckus. That is, they were never just randomly targeted for something that they did not do. Like we said, it was never unprovoked. They were being targeted because they ones were creating indiscipline issues. Second of all, you said that he did a background check of Raju and he threatened because he understood that he was the weak link. Again, to answer that, Raju was the only one that he saw the face of. So that one that was seen, there was no such, you cannot infer mentality behind it was that he's the weak link, uh, so I should target him. He just saw his face and he was the only one he saw. He was the only one he could his witness when he becomes the witness. He's the only one he questions since he was the only one he himself saw. The third part is where you say that Vice knew that either Raju will reveal the names or commit suicide. Again, that is a bit of an allegation because we do not think there are any that suggest that Virus was aware of the fact or even cognizant of the fact that whatever he's doing right now could lead him committing suicide, which again seems like a very far-fetched allegation for you to assume that a director, like according to the facts, that he knew that he would commit suicide. So he was like, either he will reveal the names or that he will commit suicide. We do not think there's any fact to establish that. Again, so we say there is no mens rea. I question.
Ajay, do you have any other question? Are you fine with the answer that you got? Fine. Yeah, right. Honor, you had some question, and please feel free to ask.
Same question. I feel like that mens rea is needed. It is something that needs to be established when you're filing a case. And we feel like the prosecution did not engage with that at all. And they can we just get a bit of a clarification on how they've established mens rea intention in this case, intention to abet him to commit, if that's my question.
Okay, fine. Does the prosecution want to take that question though?
This is with regard to the first charge, right?
Right.
Okay, Ishani, do you want to take this one?
All right. I think I already spoke about this when I was talking about the first element of abetment, which is the presence of mens rea. I also said that the malicious intention is evident from the conduct of Viru Sahastrabuddhe towards Raju Rastogi. His constant veneration and humiliation of Raju Rastogi, him targeting Raju Rastogi and humiliating him in public in front of his batchmates, further making a statement regarding his incapability of obtaining a job shows that such a statement could not have been made with a bona fide intention. His reaction, if we this is a little far fetched, but if we look at Viru Sahastrabuddhe's reaction to Raju obtaining a job, even after he had attempted suicide, it was quite bitter, and he even went to the extent of saying that he himself would set an extremely tough paper for Raju. This, I think, we can fairly conclude that this reaction shows that he never wanted Raju to do well in the first place. So all the series of conduct together points towards the malicious intention of Viru Sahasrabudhe.
Okay, thank you, Ishani, for answering for answering that question. And is there any question from any of the attendees that would like, or any clarification that they would like us to, convey with respect to anything that we have discussed so far? And we'll end the meeting in next 5-10 minutes if there's nothing from your side. Okay, well, Samriddhi, do you want to comment anything on the charges so far? What's your take?
Hello. Am I audible? Hello.
Yeah, you're audible. Do you have any question? Hello. Chirag, you're audible. Do you have any question?
Yes. No, I want
Yeah.
to ask prosecution that Mr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe is very passionate towards engineering, and he wants everyone to work. But his son also committed suicide, as he told later in the movie.
Right.
So it's not right to say that he was targeting Raju and all that stuff, because he has a virus is 65 years old, and he mentioned also that he made ICE #1 in the country, #1 engineering college in the country. So it's our education system. So it's not good to blame, or it's not okay to blame virus for attempt to suicide of Raju, as his son also committed suicide. So, and I want to talk about, and I would like to talk about that speech. And he said that ferran nitrate and pre-radicalization.
Right.
So he was targeting Rancho, not Raju and Farhan, because he knows that Rancho is the you can say main leading actor among three. Thank you.
Okay, so what Chirag had to say was basically that, that was his nature of the way he used to talk, right? So even his son committed suicide, and even he used to talk to his son in the same manner that he was talking to Raju, or he used to talk to Rancho or Farhan. That basically he did not differentiate between these three and any other student from the Imperial College, or even his son. So basically, to mean that his actions were not. I'm sorry, Ajay. Do you have any? Okay. Yeah. So basically, to mean that his actions were in any way not against these three, but rather he was trying to discipline everyone and not just these three. So if the uh, with respect to the argument that since his son also committed suicide, that would be a very weak argument here to take it forward. And I get the idea from where it is coming that he did not have any ill intention towards him, but uh, like you said, like you mentioned towards the end of your the comment that you made, that he Rancho, and he that's from the very beginning back, because he uh, put forward a questions with, I don't think anyone the university, anyone the college dared to ask Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, but Rancho being Rancho, he asked on the very first day, that to the director of the college, and he did not take it, in a good way, right? And even after that, he, and not just him, that is just the Rancho, that how he has been behaving. And if you just take the incident of Joy, when Joy committed suicide, and they were at his funeral, and when Raju mentions, to the director, that had there been some machine to measure the pressure of the mind pressure that a person goes through, especially an engineering student goes through, then it would have been clear that this was not a suicide case, but actually a murder. And right, basically he was trying to some way blame Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, if not entirely, but then at least partially, that he contributed towards that attempt, which was successful there. And if you go back to the small meeting Rancho and Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe had, that with respect to on the issue of suicide, whether how India, and whether India stands in number of suicide attempts, how students, many students commit suicide at colleges because of the pressures that they face from the academics and other activities at college. And at that time is mentioned that he brought college from, I think, 28th position to first position in India, and he has been the director for 35 years, if I'm not wrong. That's what the film says. And but then the Raju says, he has counter attempt to counter argument towards that what first position. I mean, no one talks about experiments, new ideas. Basically, it's just or any other college in India where you have just to mug up things to to get good marks and get placement, and that's how the rankings you know uh, you know taken into account. So it's a good argument that he was he. But there are also other evidences to support that he had, especially against Rancho, some kind of ill intention. That could be because of various reasons, because he felt threatened. That could also be argument because he has, I mean, like his barber, I don't know, I think it was Millimeter who mentioned that he did not like, anyone going ahead of him. I think when he was he used to bicycle to college, right? And even when his barber gets ahead even a centimeter, he would ensure that he's the one leading the race, right? Even though there's no race there. So he had that feeling that no one could challenge him. That could also be an argument that in the very first day when Rancho asked that question, he felt kind of threatened that how could how is it possible that I don't know and answer to some question. And that could be the how that could be how that could be the reason how uh, the ill intention, ill feeling towards Rancho generated. So I before I give my final verdict on this, I'll just hand it over to Samriti if she has any comment, or to just take her view on the matter.
Hello,
Yeah,
am I audible?
yeah.
I feel that basically, even though there were many issues from the side of those three boys, but Virus in general had a very tough and a very harsh conduct towards everyone in general, not just the three of them. It is whether be it his son. I mean, even though he committed suicide, it was because he was harsh towards him. Be it
Right.
Joy, he committed suicide because he was harsh again towards him. So in general, he was harsh towards everyone, not just in specific to the three people, but he was like this. And I think because of the institutional setup that he'd been in, like he was extremely tough. He was brought up in that environment, and he had been living in that environment for the past 35 years, or how many years he was the director of the institution. So because of the circumstances, he was harsh and he needed to be harsh to, control that institution and to be in such a position of power. Otherwise, you cannot, you cannot be responsible towards such a big university.
Okay. Yeah, I get that point that you have to be strict, but obviously that there has to be line for that. And the the final verdict, which I was going to give from my side, somebody will give her own final and whatever that she would like to take a decision on this matter. Uh, is I think someone has dropped the same comment here. That's what I was going to say that. I know I personally don't find that there was a mens rea involved. That there has to be clearly established that virus could have, I mean, at least could have known that what he was doing would lead to a suicide attempt. So even if that was possible, even if that could have been established, that virus could have foreseen that coming, that suicide attempt coming, then she could have been held liable even for like maybe a few years or something. So when you could see Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe had was in any way abetted or instigated Raju to take such harsh attempt harsh action. So I feel that there could not be a criminal offense uh, against Raju, but and so against Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe, but there has to be a disciplinary proceeding against him because of the way he has been reacting, and because you know of investigation is something that's a very extreme step, and one must take one must ensure that while coming to a conclusion as to rusticate someone, he must be completely sure that that decision is supported by facts and not some like random feeling that that person was not doing good, or just personal vendetta, which could have been the case. It's difficult to establish, but that could have been the case here. There's a comment in the chat box that virus advised Raju to change his room and start living with Chatu. Yeah, I don't see the point of this comment here, but Chira, would you like to clarify as to what you mean by this? My final verdict would be here is that Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe should not be charged, and under 309 read with 107 of IPC, or 503 or 504 read with 309 of IPC, but uh, uh, definitely with regard to the kind of statement he made against uh, Raju, Rancho, or even Farhan, and he made fun of them, obviously referring to someone's family background, or dragging their family condition is not a good sign of management, not a good sign of administration, and that so the college should definitely take some action against them. So that is that disciplinary proceedings will be taken against Dr. Viru Sahastrabuddhe. There can't be any criminal offense against him. Samriddhi, what's your take? What's your final verdict? Samriddhi, am I audible? Hello? Samriddhi, are you there? I don't think we can't hear you if you're speaking. You're not audible, Samriddhi.
Hello? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Come.
You're audible, Samriti.
Hello?
You're audible, Samriti.
Uh, just a sec. I think there's. Hello? Is it working now?
Samriti, you're audible. You can go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay. I agree to the fact that there hasn't been any mens rea established with regards to Section 309 and 17. The fact that he wanted Raju to commit suicide. I feel that what Raju did was a decision that he took in the heat of the moment. The fact that he was given 7.5 minutes and he panicked and he thought that he had no other option. So that's why he thought that the best way to deal with the situation would be not face the consequences at all and jump off the building. Because as we, if we look at the circumstances that took place before, the fact that drunk and the fact that basically he wasn't really under stress, he was happy with his friends, he was not really bothered what might happen. He was during exams, but I think that is something that everyone does. It was not something exceptionally noticeable that okay, this person is depressed or is under serious stress and he would be doing something. It was not visible either covertly or overtly. So I feel that virus did not make him commit something so severe as suicide.
Thank you, thank you, Samriti. And I think that would be all from our side, unless you have any question. Uh, so please feel free. I will just wait for a few seconds. Does anyone have any question? I don't see any questions in the chat box. I hope I'm guessing there's no question from your side. So thank you everyone for joining for the first episode of the On Trial series. I hope that uh, we did a good job and you all like the session. If you have any feedback for the session for the first episode of the On Trial series, please feel free to approach us either through mail, that is crlreview@gmail.com, or you can WhatsApp us on. I'll just write down the WhatsApp number here. That is 7434045410. You can text or you can WhatsApp on this number with your feedback. There'd also be few feedback from floated on our social media pages. You could share your thoughts there. So if you have any other, if you feel that there could have been some other angle with respect to this trial, please feel free to share that as well. And thanks a lot for joining for the first episode. Thank you.